So this is a long day of lectures. Here comes part 2. Power and authority is also a central feature of Angkor Wat, the largest religious complex in the world, and our last work for today. Hindu art of the Gupta period spread from India southeast to Burma and Cambodia, where it developed a new and distinctively imperial character under the patronage of the Khmer Cambodian monarchs. By the 12th century, these powerful monarchs, ruling out of Angkor, which is Khmer for city or capital, controlled an area that included portions of what is today Thailand and Vietnam. As a king of the gods, a Khmer ruler was deified during his lifetime. The kingdom of Angkor began to flourish in the 9th century along the northern shore of the Tonle Sap, the Great Lake, which dominates the center of Cambodia. The Tonle Sap was to the Khmer what the Nile was to the ancient Egyptians. During the monsoon season, the Tonle Sap quadruples in size. When the dry season returns, water flows out of the lake, leaving a fertile layer of mud. Long ago, the Khmer learned to divert the retreating water to increase rice production. As the population increased, the Khmer began to manage water even more intensively, not only for agricultural but also for religious purposes. They created broad moats around temples and built immense sacred lakes called barays, symbol of the ocean surrounding the mythical Mount Meru, the home of the Hindu gods and the center of the universe. I should note that water plays a very important role in Hinduism, as it does in many religions. Ritual bathing, especially in the holy Ganges, is a central purification ritual. In the 12th century, the capital of Angkor may have contained a population of 1 million. By comparison, one of the great cities of Europe at this time, Paris, had a population of perhaps 30,000. The royal palaces were built of perishable materials, and they have long since disappeared. But the temples were constructed out of brick and stone, and many remain in a relatively good state of preservation. The largest of these temples is Angkor Wat, which means Temple of the Capital. It was built during the reign of King Surya Varman II in the first half of the 12th century, and that's CE, by the way. Its central spire is about 200 feet tall, and the moat surrounding the complex is over 2 miles in circumference. The broad moat and the outer wall together symbolize the oceans and mountains ringing the edge of the world. Within the five towers stand for the 5 peaks of Mount Meru, a Himalayan mountain that is the heart of the Hindu universe and the home of the Hindu gods, their Mount Olympus, if you will. The temple is oriented so viewers passing through the western gate at sunrise on June 21st, which is the beginning of the Cambodian solar year, would see the sun rise directly over the central tower. This orientation may further tie the architecture and deified king within the cosmos, shades of Stonehenge. The temple's central icon depicted the king in the guise of Vishnu. An inner rectangle 3 stories high has 5 towered shrines and connecting colonnades accessible by stairways. At the focal point of this complex is the central temple, which again stands for Mount Meru, so the entire conception is a 2- and 3-dimensional mandala, or representation of the cosmos. We're going to see this again with the Temple of Borobudur in Indonesia, which is our next day's work. Surya Varman II was unusual among Khmer kings in making Vishnu the focus of court religious life. Most Hindu temples were dedicated to Shiva, who is the god of creation and destruction, and most Hindu temples faced east because Shiva ruled the eastern quadrant of the compass. Angkor Wat, however, faces west, probably because Vishnu ruled the western quadrant of the compass, but maybe also because the sun sets in the west, and this was also a royal tomb. So why did this king choose Vishnu instead of Shiva as his personal deva? Historians argue about this, but Surya Varman II was pretty clearly trying to establish himself as different from previous Khmer monarchs by promoting worship of a different god. One theory holds that the king chose Vishnu, the nourishing and preserving god, because of the political instability that had confronted the Khmer Empire at the beginning of his reign. Think of how Augustus represented himself as the preserver of peace and order after a time of chaos. This bas-relief in the South Gallery of Angkor Wat, which is not one of your required works, shows the king seated on an elaborate wooden dais whose legs and railings are carved to resemble Naga snakes. Vishnu is also often portrayed as resting on a snake. The numerous parasols, likewise are ancient emblems of royalty and high rank throughout the East. You have this map of Angkor Wat in your workbook. I recommend that you open it up and try to follow the virtual tour you're about to see. This guy's accent is a little thick and he goes too fast. But even so, try to catch the stories, especially the references to Mount Meru and the description of how the design of the complex reflects the Khmer Hindu view of the creation and structure of the universe. So here's another of your required images, and you read about this story, I hope. I also hope you'll have time to watch another children's cartoon version of the story. But basically, this is a Hindu creation myth. Asuras, or demons, have gained control of the earth. So the devas, or gods, seek help from Vishnu. He advises them to form an alliance with the demons and to together churn the ocean for the nectar of immortality, or Amrita. Mount Mandara, one of the four spurs of Mount Meru, the world's axis, was torn out to use as a churning stick. It was steadied at the bottom of the ocean by Vishnu in his avatar, that is, his incarnation, as the tortoise Kurma. The gods and demons pulled back and forth on the snake's body, causing the mountain to rotate, which in turn churned the ocean. However, once the mountain was placed on the ocean, it began to sink. Vishnu, in the form of a turtle, came to the rescue and supported the mountain on his back. When the Amrita appeared, the Devas and Asuras fought over its possession, although they had originally agreed to share it equally. After many adventures, the Amrita was finally consumed by the gods, who were thus restored in strength. In the late 13th century, Angkor Wat gradually moved from Hinduism to Theravada Buddhism, which continues to the present day. Angkor Wat is unusual among the Angkor temples in that although it was somewhat neglected after the 16th century, it was never completely abandoned to the encroaching jungle. But as you'll see from this image, the jungle has won a few rounds. Surya Varman II vanished around 1150 CE. Possibly he was murdered, and likely he was buried in Angkor Wat. Toward the end of the century, a new king came to the throne, Jayavarman VII. Jayavarman was a contradictory man. He was a devout Buddhist mystic, yet he waged war constantly, expanded the empire, and exacted tribute from his defeated foes. His statutes portray him deep in meditation, smiling with half-closed eyes, detached from worldly concerns, and yet he embarked on vast building projects to his own glory that required the labor of hundreds of thousands, many of whom were slaves, and he also kept hundreds of concubines. Just north of Angkor Wat, Jayavarman built a walled city of temples, pools, and terraces, Angkor Thom, or Great City. At the center, he raised his state temple, the Bayon. If Angkor Wat is the classical Khmer ideal, the Bayon is its Gothic sibling, replete with crooked passageways, dark galleries, and forests of stone pillars. That statement will make more sense to you in a few weeks, by the way, when we study Gothic art. The complex is a mix of Hindu and Buddhist imagery. After Jayavarman's death, the temple was modified and augmented by both Hindu and Buddhist kings. The city eventually fell into decline, and this part was abandoned in the early 17th century. Note, we did not assign homework on this work. You are most likely to be asked about the contrast with Angkor Wat, but don't neglect it. 54 towers rise from Angkor Thom's ramparts, each carved with 4 gigantic smiling faces. And here is your last required image from Angkor Wat and Thom. The College Board labels these carved faces as Jayavarman represented as the Buddha, but I should note that some scholars think these may in fact be depictions of bodhisattvas, or the compassionate attendants of the Buddha. I'll talk about these in a later lecture. Back to the churning of the ocean milk and children's cartoons. The whole 15-minute video, which starts at the beginning, is up on campus. This clip begins when the chief Vedic god Indra comes to Vishnu to ask for his help in getting rid of the demons who have taken over the god's land, Indraloka. Hope you have some time to watch this. Now, on to Buddhist art.